Rain made noise like a crowd on the truck's roof. The airport lights smeared across the windshield long, wet pencils of light. I had just kissed my wife goodbye, watched her fade through the sliding doors, and thought it was an ordinary night. That's what I told myself. Routine, business trip, coffee, hugs, and then home. Then my son's small hand grabbed my forearm so hard it hurt. "Dad," he said, his voice was a thin wire of fear. "Don't go home tonight, I know something about Mom." I remember the way the words landed, soft but impossible to ignore. The radio hissed, tires on wet tarmac. A woman's laugh somewhere behind us muffled. My mind made the easy choices first. He's tired. He's watched too many scary cartoons. He's 8. He's a kid who notices shadows and thinks they're people. But tonight his grip didn't let go. His knuckles white, his breath shallow against the back of my seat. There was a weight in his eyes I'd seen only twice before, when his dog ran away and when he first learned the word cancer at his grandfather's funeral. Pure fear is not the same as imagination. It sits differently in the face. It was there. I told myself to be reasonable. I'm an engineer. I calculate risks for a living. I thought about probabilities. Risk of believing him and wasting the night, small. Risk of not believing and being wrong, catastrophic. The decision should have been simple. I turned the wheel toward a different light. A motel sign, flickering like a lifeline. We drove past our street without going in. We sat in a borrowed darkness a half block away, the truck humming, our porch light 2 houses down glowing like a beacon that might as well have been a target. The longer we sat, the more the world narrowed to 2 things, the blue door of our house and the tremor in my son's voice. I told him it was fine to be scared. He said, "Please, Dad, please believe me this time." Those words, "this time," are what I will never forget, because there had been a before. A dozen little things I'd ignored. The late night calls he swore he'd heard. The car parked across the street at night for 3 nights. I'd patted his head and sent him back to bed. I trusted the normalcy of my life over the messy, oblique truths of a child. We watched our house from the dark. The maple tree threw ragged shadow teeth across the lawn. I watched the porch light as if it could tell me something. That night, the porch light told me nothing but shame, because every ordinary object became suspect. The mailbox could be a hiding place. The back gate and exit, every small noise was suddenly a message. I didn't know then that my son's warning would save us. I didn't know that by the end of the night, the air would taste like metal, and the sky would be orange where our home used to be. I didn't know that the person I'd shared a bed with for years would stand in a crowd and cry real tears with someone else's plan tucked behind them. There's something you still don't know, but I'll get to that. For now, listen to the sound of rain on my truck roof. Listen to a child's hand on an arm. Listen to the tiny, terrifying voice that said, "Don't go home tonight." My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 42. I design safety systems for a living, a man who solves risks for companies that build things that must not fail. I've taken pride in that, the math, the diagrams, the sweat of a job done right. I live in a small house with a blue door on a quiet street in Lake City. We painted it the first summer after we moved in. I remember the smell of fresh primer and my son's sticky hands on the banister. People say an engineer sees the world as a set of problems to be solved. That's true for me. For years, I solved them at work and thought I'd solve them at home by giving my family stability. I thought love was measured in mortgages and college funds, in propping up a life so comfortable it would never have to ask for more. It turned out stability can be disguising. A life can be tidy on the surface and dangerous underneath. That's what I learned, the kind of knowledge that screams into your ribs in the dark. My son Lucas was 8 that night. He's small, bandy-legged, earnest, the kind of kid who reads the faces of strangers and catalogs little details like trophies. He remembers license plate numbers. He notices handshakes. He notices what most adults don't see because we teach ourselves to look away. My wife Kinsley worked in marketing. Polished briefcases, blazers, the kind of smile that belongs in brochures. She was the person you'd want to meet in an elevator and take a card from. She loved the lights and the attention that came with them. I fell for how she laughed once, and I will never be able to prove the sincerity of anything after that. Our marriage wasn't dramatic. We weren't secretive about fights or passionate about reconciliation. We were steady, roommates who shared bills and a child. That steadiness became my prison. I mistook it for safety. I mistook normal for known. The wound I carried into that night was simpler and quieter than betrayal. It was the ache of being ignored, the slow erosion of attention I'd assumed would be there because I was there. I told myself that working late, missing dinners, bringing home takeout, all of that was sacrifice. It was proof I was providing. But provision does not equal presence. Those details built a distance between me and the woman I loved. They also hid cracks I couldn't see until they grew large enough to swallow us whole. My son noticed the cracks long before I did. Children have an honesty that will make your bones ache. He told me things and I decided they were stories kids tell. That's the truth of it. Men in safety systems sometimes don't apply their own tools to the people they love. I tell you this because I want you to know the man telling the story. Not a hero, not a martyr. A man who learned the hard lesson that expertise on paper does not protect you from the human heart's hidden calculations. There's more to the story, and there's another wound I didn't see, one that would make the engineer in me useless. But first, you need to understand who watched me that night and why his small voice was heavy enough to change everything. Our house had a blue door, old wooden floors that creaked like a clock when you moved, and a kitchen that smelled of lemon oil and coffee. We bought it when Lucas was small enough to fall asleep on my chest. I remember the first winter when the heater broke and we wrapped ourselves in quilts by the stove. Those are soft memories, the kind that make you think safety is real. The living room was where the light pooled in the afternoons. My drafting table sat by the window, papers stacked into patient towers. Lucas had a dinosaur blanket he dragged everywhere. Kinsley kept vases on the mantel and a stack of magazines that hinted at a life in motion. It was ordinary in the way people's lives tend to be, messy surface, neat intentions underneath. Sounds of home are important, the click of the thermostat, the microwave beep, the squeak of the door as it settled at night. Those sounds are anchors. That night they became clues. I learned the sound of our house the way I'd learned the sound of a machine, the small, subtle rhythms that make everything predictable. When those sounds changed, I should have noticed sooner. Our routine was a quiet choreography. Dinners at 7 if Kinsley had flown in. Pancakes on Saturdays if I could drag myself out of work. Bedtime stories with a dinosaur lamp that bathed Lucas in orange light. The rituals made the house feel like a thing you could trust. There were small tensions, like the way Kinsley frowned at my messy garage or how I rolled my eyes at her impulse purchases. We argued about paint colors and whether to get an air purifier. Those are the kinds of things that, in hindsight, look like the harmless dents of everyday life, but each dent mattered. The truth is, small things are often the first sign of the big thing. Family history lived in boxes in our office. My father had been a union man who taught me how to spot a bad deal. He said once, "Trust facts, son. People sometimes behave differently when the lights go out." I'd laughed then. I wish I'd listened. My son's room was a world of maps and plastic action figures and scribbled drawings of our house. He drew lines, plotted exits, labeled windows. I thought it was a game. Maybe it was. Maybe his small, detailed mind just liked shapes. Now those drawings look like blueprints in my memory, little maps that later proved prophetic. We had cameras at the door, a system I'd designed myself. I believed in redundancy, locks, smoke detectors, insurance policies you hope you'll never use. I designed safety margins into more than houses. I'd built them into my life, or so I thought. Then you start noticing the tiny mismatches. A light turned on for no reason, a coffee cup that isn't where you left it, a new footprint in the garden, things that should have made you look twice, but instead you make excuses. Work, stress. The brain is very good at making normal everything it wants to be normal. The night my son gripped my arm, the blue door was a flat moon in the distance. The maple tree swayed in the rain. Somewhere inside, a radio played a late-night show and the kitchen sink ticked as it cooled. Home should have felt warm. Instead, it hummed with potential danger, like a machine you suspect is about to fail. There's a sound I can still hear. The soft click of the deadbolt at our back door, a sound I never thought would matter until the man on the other side of it became part of someone else's plan. But that comes later. For now, remember the blue door, the maple, the small, ordinary noises. Those are the anchors I would cling to when everything else tilted. A week before the airport, Lucas had woken me up at 2 a.m. He said there was a car across the street, a dark shape. He said it sat there for hours with no lights on, like it was waiting. I told him it was probably a delivery truck. I told him to go back to bed. In hindsight, I wish I had stood in the doorway with him and watched. I muffled his worry with logic because logic is what I trusted. There were other small things. Kinsley started taking longer calls in the car, urgent work, she said. She began leaving small things in weird places, a note in the laundry, a pair of house keys where they'd never been before. I assumed she was simply busy. Maybe she was. People are busy. But people also do small things when they're making plans. The biggest change was in how she smiled at me. Not a coldness so much as a distance, an economy of feeling. That distance is subtle. It creeps up as temperature drops. You notice it in how someone turns their head away during a conversation, in how they stop asking about your day. I noticed it and made excuses. Work, fatigue, hormones, whatever kept me from looking harder. Lucas began to sleep with his bedroom door cracked. He asked questions about locks and keys. He learned to check the window latches after I taught him how to change a smoke alarm battery. He told me little things with the frankness only a child has. "Dad, she's been laughing with a man at the gym." "Dad, there's a number on Mom's phone named C. I heard and filed them under kid things." That was my mistake. One night I found a receipt for cash withdrawal hidden under a magazine, $50,000. I confronted her. She said it was for business cash. She had an explanation for everything. She was never slow with an answer. She smiled and used words that sounded right. It was an old trick. Confident speech can cover a lot. Then the night at the airport happened. Watching her walk into departure's black blazer, hair pulled back, she looked like a professional woman getting on a plane. A woman with a ticket, a boarding pass, an itinerary. Nothing about her gait screamed premeditation. Not then. We sat in the truck across from our house, rain making small worlds on the glass. Lucas was quiet at first, then he whispered, "They talked about the key." My stomach dropped. He said, "She told them where I sleep." He told me that she'd left something in a locker at the airport. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to fold the story into the reassuring blanket of normalcy. But I remembered the empty black van across two houses, the scent of something sharp and chemical in the air days later. The way our smoke alarms had chirped for no reason in the middle of the night. The smell of petroleum on a sock in a laundry load. Small things, anomalous things. My training made me catalog them. The engineer in me began to see patterns. I started to shadow the house from a distance. My son watched and counted like it was a game. The darkness sharpened what light hid. At 10:45, a van with no front plate rolled past. Men got out, hoodies up. One of them fitted a small object against the back door like they'd practiced it. They moved with the calm of people repeating a plan. The fire, when it came, wasn't a clumsy accident. It moved through the house as if someone had given it a map. Multiple ignition points. Accelerant, professional timing. The things we design to keep people safe can be repurposed. Someone who knows a system can weaponize it. At that moment, sitting in the truck, I felt something break inside me. The rise of suspicion turned into a hard, cold, wherever it has to go kind of resolve. I would not be the man who rationalized danger away. I'd been an expert at prediction for years. Now I had to become an expert at proof. There's more you don't yet know about why Kinsley did what she did. There's a deeper pattern. But before that truth, I had to find the small proofs. Little evidence that turns a rumor into a case. And I had to convince officers, lawyers, a world built to trust paperwork, not gut. That takes time and danger. The first real proof came from the back seat of Kinsley's car. I drove to the airport in the small, cold hours after the fire, pretending to be a husband looking for a missing wallet. The parking lot was empty except for the beasts of long-term travel. Level 3, Section B, there it was. Our silver Honda, the thing that had carried grocery bags and family playlists, now the quiet vessel of answers. I used a spare key I kept because engineers are compulsive about redundancy. I opened the door and the smell hit me, perfume and then something chemical, the same sharp sting I had smelled in the ash. My hands trembled, but I moved with a kind of clinical thoroughness. I found a burner phone under the passenger seat. It had 15% battery. The screen lit with messages that read like confessions. Chad, I can't keep living this lie. I want to be with you. Chad, the money's wired. 50K now, leave the key under the mat. Chad, collateral damage. Kid is collateral. You want a new life or not? The phone showed dates, timestamps. She had texted him like a script of intent. There were receipts, cash withdrawals, locker rentals at the airport, insurance policy documents with Kinsley's signature as beneficiary. The pages were clinical, bland, until you read the handwriting that circled my own blueprints and wrote, "Disable here. Make it look like his mistake." I remember kneeling on the parking lot concrete and feeling every breath like a physical act. Engineers document everything. I photographed every text, every receipt. I sent copies to a secure email I had set up when my father pressed an attorney's card into my hand at his funeral and told me to call her if I ever truly needed help. I didn't call that number lightly. It felt like surrender and salvation at the same time. The evidence showed a plan. A man with debts, a woman with access, and a conspiracy stitched together with cash and keys. It spelled out motive, money, freedom, and a hunger for a life that didn't include the small obligations that had built our family: bedtime stories, taxes, vaccine appointments. The words collateral damage sat on the screen like an accusation I could not deny. I sat in my truck until dawn with the phone on my lap, hands numb. This wasn't just betrayal, it was intent. It changed the geometry of my life. The person I'd trusted had plotted to take everything away. The documents tied her handwriting to the sabotage of safety systems, my systems. The irony was precise enough to make me sick. The blueprints I had drawn to protect our home had become a murder manual in her handwriting. I knew what evidence would be objected to in a court. Claims she could say the phone was planted, receipts could be forged. Emotion is messy, the law wants numbers and chain of custody. So I did what engineers do, I documented the chain. I photographed, timestamped, backed up. Evidence is heavy, proof is heavier. I felt both the weight and the relief. When I finally drove back to the motel, with the burner phone and photocopies in a folder, Luca's asleep in the bed, I tasted a strange mix of fear and a cold kind of clarity. We had proof. Now we needed a plan to make someone listen who could do something about it. We needed someone who would not be impressed by a polished alibi. We needed justice that spoke with sound and paper and law. There's a part of the story that looks like a movie: the wire, the confession, the courtroom. But none of it would have happened without that small device beneath a passenger seat, and without a son who gripped my arm when everyone else told him to sleep. You'll understand why she did it. The reasons are cruel and mundane at the same time. They make me feel small when I think about them. I called him Berlin Turner at 1 a.m. Her voice was a flat blade of competence when she answered. She had been my father's friend, a woman who handled the inconvenient, the dangerous, the cases people wanted buried. The kind of lawyer who kept her conscience in a drawer labeled work. She said, "Don't go to the police yet. We need more than pictures. We need a recorded confession." I felt ridiculous repeating those words out loud, recorded confession, but she was right. Texts can be dismissed. Receipts can be argued away. A voice, on the other hand, is difficult to unhear. Berlin's plan was surgical: bait her into talk, record it, and then let the law do what it does best. Detective Tom Wilson took the other piece of the plan. He'd been on the force 28 years and had the look of a man who'd carried the world's worst news home with him. He didn't care about gender dynamics or sob stories. He cared about facts. He understood that sometimes the people who needed to be believed were not the ones who made the prettiest reports. We set a trap that could have been pulled from a novel. Berlin sent a message as if from a fire investigator. We located remains, need to discuss identification. The bait was irresistible. A grieving person's need to know creates a desperate honesty. Then we layered the setting: a busy coffee shop with cameras, undercover officers blended into the steady hum of cappuccinos, a wire on my chest, a script of questions to nudge her. Practicing the conversation felt like rehearsing for an operation. I fumbled with the body mic, my hands shook. There's a strange intimacy to preparing to watch the person you thought you knew reveal their real self. Lucas slept in a motel bed while I learned how to fake grief and feign ignorance. The day came like a held breath. The coffee machine's hiss, the murmur of conversation, calm on the surface and tense underneath. When she walked in, she looked like a woman carrying pain. She sat. I kept my voice steady. Berlin was on a phone, Detective Wilson was in a van outside, and I had a recorder taped to my chest. That conversation is the one that changes how the world knows you. She laughed at first, a brittle thing, then she leaned in. The words came slow and then accelerating, the way someone recites a script they've practiced long enough to believe. She told me about Chad, about the money, about the plan. She said the words collateral damage aloud, and the coffee shop seemed to shrink. There's a strange feeling when truth is spoken in public. People turn, the barista looks up, a toddler spills his juice, and yet the words sit there heavy and undeniable. I remember her voice clearest at the moment she shrugged and said, "It's merciful." That's what hurt most, her calculation masquerading as kindness. Walkie-talkies clicked. Detective Wilson's badge flashed. Officers closed the gap like a curtain dropping. She was taken away with a look on her face that was not anger, not fear. It was relief. A mask slid off. The woman I loved and had tried to understand for 15 years stepped out of the costume and stood in the light. The investigation after that was meticulous. Search warrants, bank records, phone forensics. Berlin and Detective Wilson built a case from the concrete things that prove the impossible. Wire recordings, burner phone data, cash trails, and two men's confessions who had been promised money. In the weeks that followed, I walked into rooms filled with paper and evidence, watched experts trace transactions, and sat in courts where lawyers argued about motive like it was an equation. My life narrowed to lists, exhibits, dates, timestamps. The stress was a constant hum. But the most wrenching part of the investigation wasn't evidence. It was watching my son change. He was quieter, more watchful. Therapy started. He retreated sometimes into himself, then crawled back slowly like someone testing the safety of ground after a quake. The guilt of being the man who had missed the small things haunted me. The investigation forced me to look at every neglected call, every missed recital, and measure them against the choice of a woman who would weaponize those absences. There's a main twist coming, the part you will never expect about why she decided to do this. It's uglier for being human. But first, the quiet things we did to make sure the truth would hold up in a courtroom. That quiet was where justice began. When you think betrayal, you picture passion or sudden cruelty. Ours was quieter, a slow calculation dressed in spreadsheets and shorthand. The main twist wasn't that she wanted money. It was how she had reimagined her whole life as a ledger where people were entries to be resolved. That's the part that broke me. In court, the recordings played and the text scrolled, and her handwriting matched the red marks on my blueprints. But it was what she said in that cafe, in the raw, unspooling moment before the cuffs, that made the betrayal into something I could hardly hold. She told me she had been suffocating for years. That marriage had felt like a contract with clauses she never signed. IVF had eaten at her, years of procedures, failures, and a hollowness that made resentment bloom. She admitted she had met Chad 6 months earlier and that he saw her, that he made her feel wanted. Chad had debts. Chad had an appetite for risk. She painted it like a short arithmetic. 50,000 now, 3 million later, a fresh start in Hawaii, and a life where she was not the woman who kept bedtime. But then she said it out loud in the way that made my skin crawl. She shrugged and called Lucas an obligation. Saying that word turned him into an item on a balance sheet, a line to be cleared. And then she described the method with calm, precise detail: how to make my gas system look faulty, where to cut, how to lay accelerant so the blaze would spread like a chimera. She told me she'd studied the blueprints for months. She confessed to leaving the spare key under the back mat with a casualness that made the coffee shop's air thin. The human part of her reasoning was the most terrifying. She said, "I wanted to be free.